Hey, we are live. Hey, TCSTV viewers, it's Dave here coming to you live from the camera store. Thanks for tuning in. I will be your host for tonight's event, which is getting the most out of your raw wildlife images with Brad Hill of Natural Art Images. I'd also like to send a big thank you to Capture One for sponsoring tonight's event, but behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. We're lucky tonight we have the TCSTV Live Dream Team, which we have Drew, Jeff, and Riley, who's working from home, monitoring all of our social media. But of course, we are live, so anything can happen. So if something does happen, just stay tuned to the comments, and we'll try and get that rectified as soon as we possibly can. And on that note, if you've registered for this event already, we will be sending you an email with a link to a very special offer from our partners at Capture One. But don't worry, if you didn't register online already, simply send an email to evelyn@thecamerastore.com and she'll send you those special offers to you directly. That's EVELYN@thecamerastore.com. Now, part of what I really like about these live streams is the ability to interact with all of you. So we will be monitoring the chat room for comments and questions throughout the night here, and hopefully putting together a really good package at the end of it to talk to Brad about later on after he's done his presentation. We also have Liz from Capture One who's joining us in the live stream chat room, who's going to answer some questions there. Now, if you don't want to log in, you can always just simply email me. It's just my first name at thecamerastore.com. So it's dave@thecamerastore.com. And now, if you are not already familiar with our guest tonight, Brad Hill is a full-time professional wildlife photographer who resides in Southeast British Columbia. Brad's unique educational and professional background almost accidentally pre-adapted him with a full range of skills necessary to excel in digital wildlife photography. Brad, thank you for joining us from beautiful British Columbia tonight.
Hi, Dave. Yeah, I'm doing well out here. I'm one of the few people in British Columbia not flooded. So
yes, the province is having a rough time right now.
Oh boy, are we ever. So, but yeah, and anyone who's watching from the lower mainland, my heart goes out to you guys. Hang in there. You know, there's help coming, and yeah, I hope everything works out well.
This is awesome. So you're going to be talking about Capture One and your kind of workflow and working with raw images. So I'm excited about this because I'm not really a Capture One user yet. So I've always been another program user. So I'm interested to see this because I've been reading some stuff and some researching. So I'm very interested in paying attention to your seminar tonight. So let's get right into it if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I'll just dig in right now. And so tonight what we're going to be talking about, of course, is getting the most out of your raw wildlife images. And one of the first things I'm going to say, of course, is that I know we have a group tonight where I'm expecting we have some very high-end Capture One users, as well as probably some that have never even seen what Capture One looks like. And so I'm going to start off with making a few general comments about it, and in a sense give a bit of an overview of Capture One before we dig into it, actually working with some images. And what Capture One is a full-featured and real complete raw workflow tool. So think of it as really a whole soup to nuts program with features covering virtually all aspects of your raw image workflow. So it's, in a sense, I know a lot of people are familiar with Lightroom. It's really a head-to-head competitor with Adobe Lightroom. And historically, although not anymore, Apple Aperture. So that's what we're looking at. And of course, it is used in a whole wide variety of professionals and even keen enthusiasts raw workflows. And that's over a lot of different a lot of different photography genres. So wildlife and nature photography for one, and that's obviously the one I list first as a wildlife photographer, but studio work, wedding photography, etc. So it's really got a broad base in terms of the different users. And like any program with broad base, it'll do a lot of different things. And tonight we can only touch on a few of them. I've personally used Capture One since way back in 2004, and my first use of it was when I was shooting a wedding, actually, and I've been with it almost continuously ever since. I say almost in that some in the crowd here may know that I used to work with Adobe years ago, and at one point I thought, you know, I'm surrounded with Adobe stuff, maybe I should just, you know, bite the bullet and use Lightroom. And so, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I made a venture into using Lightroom full time, and I gave myself 6 months. And after 6 months, I made the mistake of opening Capture One again. I'm going, oh God, I'm going back. So I've been a Capture One user pretty much exclusively since 2004. Now, I'll give a brief overview of Capture One. Like any full-featured RAW workflow tool, of course, you've got a phase of image ingestion. You can import images into it, in other words. And one thing that's a bit different with Capture One than with other RAW workflow tools is that you'll import your images into either a catalog or a session. Lightroom and Aperture users will be familiar with the idea of a catalog. You know, think of it as a sort of a master organization of your images, usually featuring things like virtual collections, filtering of your images, keyword searches, so an image organization tool. So of course Capture One has that. It also has a workflow surrounding what's called a session. And think of that as a project-based workflow. So with a session, a good example would be I lead photo tours, and very commonly when I go out into the field and lead a photo tour, all the images during that photo tour will go into a session. And during the trip, I can be editing them, I can be adding metadata, keywords, doing whatever I want. When I get back home, I'll either leave them in the session, or more often than not, import them into my catalog. So catalogs and sessions can work together hand in hand very well. Sessions being very portable, catalogs generally bigger collections of images. So you have that choice when you're setting up Capture One. So think in terms of a catalog or a session. And I just wanted to point out in terms of image importing, just a few key things during image import that I think are going to be fairly important, or even becoming more important as time goes on, especially with the new super high-speed cameras that we're all looking at these days. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a few features during import, and then I'm going to show a great feature for use in image culling. And the reason I'm going to be doing this image culling is I want to spend the bulk of today on image adjustments, but with right now there's a lot of excitement around a group of cameras. There can be the Sony A1, the Canon R3, and of course the Nikon Z9. And one thing about those cameras is they're shooting at incredible frame rates. In the Nikon case, up to 120 frames per second. And we're going to be facing just this massive pool of images. And if we don't know how to handle them, it's going to be, I won't say a nightmare, but it's going to be quite a task to handle them all. So I'll go in just a second. We'll jump in and look at a few things with respect to image ingestion. Image adjustments will be what we deal with the bulk of today. So I'll just skip over it for now. And of course, with Capture One, you can do image exporting. And what I mean there is going from your RAW format to another format, such as a TIFF or PSD or Photoshop file, a JPEG, etc. So, and in the image exporting, Capture One is based on what's called a recipes. Well, they basically work with exporting recipes, and you can set up as many recipes as you want. Each recipe would be something like, okay, I want this raw image exported as a JPEG at a certain size in sRGB color, etc. And you can create as many recipes as you'd like, and I'll show you in just a minute. And the neat thing about Capture One is that from any image you're editing, you can export in one single export action. You can use multiple recipes, and allowing you to produce multiple output files simultaneously, each of them with different names if you want, different formats, and exported to different locations. So a prime example there is when I'm working on an image, very commonly I'll be wanting to have at least 5 export recipes going at once when I export it, so that I've got web images ready to go, I've got a master file ready to go, I've got a medium resolution file for emailing purposes ready to go, but this is all built into Capture One so that you can do it very quickly. And so let's just jump over now for just a second over to Capture One. So I'm going to take you over to my desktop. And what I want to do first is I'm just going to show you something related to the image importing. So I won't get into the mechanics of exactly how you do every keystroke, but I'm just hitting the image import button. And just like Julia Child on a cooking show, I made sure I had some things ready to go. And I've just got a group of images here that are ready to import. And traditionally, this is the way a lot of programs will import images, where you just get a small thumbnail. And then you, well, of course, you want to import from, and I can zoom in a little bit for people to see this better, and I'll just come down a little lower. So you can import from any source you want. You can import it to any location you want. And then, of course, you could back them up on the way in. You could rename the files, add any sort of metadata you wanted, add other adjustments to the to it as well on the way in. After import, determine what you're going to be doing with the images. But back in Capture 21.1, they came out with something brand new called a viewer during the import process. Now, these images are not residing right now in my catalog. I'm about to import them. But I can go through, and depending on how big I want my window, and I'm going to zoom out so you can see this better, you can go through and cull your images if you want, and lightning quick speed, just like you would in a program like Photo Mechanics. So these are pre-import. And this is the kind of feature where if you're using a camera like the Nikon Z9 that's shooting at 120 frames a second, you may not want to import every single image in. And so you've got a great way here of looking at previews of the image really quickly, lightning speed, and just choosing the few that you want to bring in. And so, you know, these are just, no previews have been built. These are just the JPEG previews that are built into the actual raw file. So let's go through the process. So what I'm doing is I'm just going down the list and just getting rid of a bunch of them, saying, no, I don't want them. I'm just hitting the space bar and removing the checkbox. And I'm going through, and we'll take that one. We'll take that one, not that one. We'll take that one, not that one, not that one. Sure, we'll leave that one out, leave that one out. We'll take that one, oops, other way. And we'll grab that one. And I don't really need any more for right now. Oh, we'll take that one in. And I'll just be through this in a second. And I'll just import the ones I chose then. And so I've basically done a pre-culling of the images, and I'll just import some images right now. And so they're coming in, and Capture One is building the previews for them, and it's done it quickly. Now, the reason I wanted to import a few images in, I wanted to show you one other feature that I just love about Capture One. And as far as I know, and virtually no other programs are doing it right now, is that you can, if you want, select as many images you want, and then in the viewer, you can bring up to a dozen images at 100% preview. You can move individual images around if you want to compare different regions of them, but you go back and forth from full size to individual, right up to 100%. So if you want to compare images and cull quickly, the ability to actually bring 12 images at once up to 100% can really speed your workflow. So it's a little feature that I think, with respect to the new cameras coming out, people are going to use more and more. So that's the ability to cull on import with the new preview window, as well as, in this case, go through when you've got the images imported, cull them very effectively, because you can see, you just don't have to do pairwise comparisons of the images. So yeah, I just wanted to show you those features for now. So let's go back to where we were, and I'll just zoom back out for now, and let's go back to where we were. So now, a question I get all the time, and I thought I'd just address it right here because I'm sure it'll show up, or I'll get emails about it afterwards, is why do I use Capture One? And I'd love to be able to say because they pay me millions of dollars to do so. However, that's not really the case. I use Capture One this is probably my most important reason, is the speed and efficiency in getting to the best possible result. And there's a lot to unpack in that statement. And so why I find that to be the case is it's partly due to the extremely high quality previews you get out of Capture One. And one thing they've always taken pride with at Capture One is the quality of the image previews they make for each model of camera they support. So when the support comes out for the Canon R3 or the Sony A1's already out, but or the Nikon Z9, you'll find that those quality of the previews are fantastic. And in a sense, they're almost halfway through the processing you'll have to do to the image. And what I have found over the years, people have asked me directly, but do you get better quality images? And my response there is that in my experience, I find that I can usually get, with Lightroom, maybe 70 to 80% of the images up to the same quality as I could get in Capture One, but it's going to take me 20 or 30 more clicks to get to the same place that I get to in Capture One quicker. It's just that much more efficient. Of course, another reason I use Capture One, or why I find it very efficient, is it's got a very complete array of image adjustment tools. Of course, all the basics like exposure, contrast, the HDR tools to work in the shadows and highlights, clarity. We could go through the list, and it's just a very complete array of image adjustment tools. A huge part of the reason I love and use Capture One Pro is got an excellent way they've implemented their selective editing. And when I say selective editing, I mean working on just a portion of the image. And it works on a model similar to Photoshop, where you've got at least the same metaphor, where you have layers and then you make adjustment on layers and you mask off certain parts of the images to show the adjustments through. And of course, it's partly due to a really good implementation, I'd say crazy good implementation of keyboard shortcuts. When I'm working on my own images, I rarely even have to touch my mouse. So I'm just using my stylus on my Wacom and keyboard shortcuts, and I can move through images really quickly. The second reason another thing I just love about Capture One and really keeps me in the Capture One camp is the real flexibility and efficiency of image exporting. The fact that I can go to multiple formats and have them all named independently of one another and going to different locations on my hard drive. I just love the image exporting. And there's almost no need, I find, now to use additional tools in your RAW workflow. And that being said, I'm not saying absolutely no need. I will occasionally use one of the newer noise reduction software tools for images shot at really, really high ISOs. And so when I say really high ISOs, if I'm shooting with a Nikon D6, I'm completely happy with the noise reduction of Capture One up to about ISO 8000. Beyond that, I can usually do a little bit better with denoise from Topaz, but realistically for 90% of my images, the noise reduction software is absolutely excellent for the images I'm working on. And of course, it's not a graphic design sort of tool, Capture One. So if you want to, as an example, overlay text or build a poster, those are the kinds of things that you can do easily in Photoshop, or for that matter in the lower priced Affinity Photo. And those are things that Capture One doesn't do, but for most workflows, those are things that aren't that critical really. So I almost never leave Capture One anymore. I'm just almost always in Capture One. And we're going to move on now to image adjustments, which is what I think what most people want to see. And I'm going to make a few comments before we dig into the actual images themselves. First off, when you look at the way I've got Capture One set up, if you're a Capture One user, yours may be set up very differently. And the thing is that is worth knowing is that it's extremely flexible in how you set it up and in terms of how you arrange your tools and how you view your images. And supporting that, you can set up alternate workspaces. I use a dual monitor setup, and so I'm sitting in front of a very old iMac with a 27-inch screen, as well as a ISO 27-inch, which is my more critical image editing monitor. But it sets up really well on 2 monitors, and I've set up multiple workspaces, and I'll show you guys some in just a few seconds. And I'll just make a few other comments on the image adjustment tools before we dig in. Number one is that if you're a lover of slider tools, so an exposure slider or a highlight slider, you've got all sorts of slider tools available to you in Capture One. But if you're, in a sense, more of a traditionalist and you want to go about using images the way you learned, maybe 20 years ago, using levels and curves, absolutely you've got those tools as well. Moreover, if you're a fan of using presets, which is what Lightroom tends to call them, or styles, Capture One has all sorts of styles available to it, so you can get a certain look to your images. And the styles in Capture One are already built in, many of them. There's additional ones available as sets for purchase. And I'm just going to make one comment on the styles. I would be lying if I said I use styles regularly, but what I love about them is that the way they're executed in Capture One is if you apply a certain style to an image, of course what it is a preset of adjustments, but if you reverse engineer and go back and look at the adjustments that are made to create that style, it's a fantastic learning tool. So I tend to use them for exactly that reason, is I go back and use them as learning tools. So I'll go and say, well, how did they get that sepia look? Oh, they did this, this, and this. So it's a really good way to teach yourself Capture One. And the other thing that I'm going to talk about, or I'll just touch on here, is when we're working on any kind of image editing, there's sort of 2 parts to it, is how you make the specific adjustments. So that's the simple mechanics of it, going in and learning how the tool works. And then there's the side of why do you make certain changes. And when I'm going through the images, and I'm going to start with one and we'll spend a fair amount of time in it, I want to also let you know about why I'm making certain image adjustments. And for those who caught the video we put up a few weeks ago on 6 easy steps to great wildlife captures, you'll find a lot of what I do when I'm working with images are based off the same principles, things like visual contrast and simplify and isolate. So I'll try to mention as I'm going a lot of the whys of what I'm doing as well. So anyways, let's play a little and then get down to business. So I'm going to take you now over to Capture One, and I'm just going to take you to a group of images. So let's take you back to the desktop, and I'll just go back to 0 here. Now, I had mentioned previously that I've got a couple different workspaces, or you can set up workspaces extremely easily in Capture One Pro. And what I'm going to do here is, what you're looking at right now is the workspace I use for culling images on my, this is now sitting, what you're looking at is one of my 2 monitors. And I also have an editing workspace that I use a lot, and I'm just taking you to that now, and you'll see that it's rearranged the desktop quite extensively. So this is generally the workspace I work in when I'm editing. So I've moved the browser to the bottom to give myself more real estate. And on my second monitor, if I take you over there, I'll show you here, I'll just take you over to the secondary desktop. This is the editing view I have on my ISO, and so I've got my key tools set up and then a very large version of the image sitting right there. And of course I can go in and zoom in if, to my heart's content if I'd like to. If I take you back now to the first or I can also take you here to the culling workspace on my alternate monitor. And again, what I'm showing basically is that so when I'm culling, you'd see that I would be having multiple images displayed at once on my secondary desktop. So that's what I just wanted to give you a quick feel for, is the flexibility of setting this system up is really, really great and really, really convenient. So, okay, let's just go back to our initial desktop and let's start playing with some adjustments. So what I'm going to do here is I've selected this image to work on because it's going to demonstrate an awful lot of tools that make a difference to the image really quickly. And let's begin. So let's jump into this image. So this was shot with a Nikon Z7 II with a 500mm PF lens with a 1.4x teleconverter. So when you're looking at this image, you've got obviously a very out of focus background. And what am I going to do to this thing to improve it? So I'm just going back and forth in views here. When I look at this shot, the first thing I notice off the bat, now this, for context, this was shot with the very first rays of sunlight coming through, and I intentionally overexposed the shot slightly to pick up all the shadow details so I'd have that data there to work with. So the very first thing I would do, and let's zoom in a little bit here so you can see the tools better, and I'll bring them over as I use them. I'm going to start off with an extremely simple adjustment, and the first thing I'm going to do is simply cut the exposure, and I'm going to cut it only by about 1/3 of a stop. And on this exposure slider, those are stops. So if I went back to -1.5, that's 1.5 stops, and I can easily go back again to about -0.3, and that happens to be the same amount that I overexposed the shot in the field intentionally. And so realistically, I'm going to also pull down the brightness. Now what brightness is, for those who want to know the difference between exposure and brightness, is that brightness is functionally the exposure values of the midtones. So when I pull those back, it's going to stay out of the highlights and it's going to stay out of the shadows, and it's only going to pull the midtones down. And so I've taken it down quite a bit here, probably a bit too far. And we'll just stop there. And so that's just my basic first adjustment. So simple as pie, right? Just using a slider, nothing difficult there. Now we're going to jump up in complexity quite a bit. When I look at this shot, when I captured it, and I'll zoom out so you can see the whole thing for a second. When I captured this shot, I was thinking I wanted of course, the female mountain bluebird, which is what this is, to really, really stand out. And the sun was hitting the distant trees in the background, and with that, they're quite bright as well. And so one of the first things I'm going to do is I want to selectively darken the background and not mess with the bird much or the stump. So how can I do that? In version 21 I think it was 21.3 of Capture One, they came out with a tool called the Magic Brush tool. And what it is, it's a tool that does a couple things. And I'm going to bring out my layers palette and zoom in a little bit to show you guys. So what this tool does, and you can get to it simply by clicking on this icon, is that it does two things. I'm going to make a selection here, and in doing so, you'll see a mask being created. The red line is a mask. It's automatically created an adjustment layer, which just jumped out. And at the same time, that brush is looking for, or the area I brushed on, is defining the RGB values, and it's looking for similar pixels throughout. And you can see that if we look at this up close, it's done an amazing job. Whoops. Hang on, folks. I lost my, hang on. Live TV. I'll just be a second. I've just got to bring back the desktop, Capture One on the desktop. There we go. Sorry about that. Now there's a little bit at the bottom missed, and so with that tool, all I can do, it's an additive tool, and I can just click on that area, and all of a sudden I've got a mask that is exceptionally detailed and is the background only. Now, what's a mask? I've got to explain a little bit here. I've created a layer, and the way it works in Capture One is the mask which is currently visible is where your adjustment is going to take place. So in this case, and all I have to do is either go in and I can clear the mask, or I can hide it by just hitting M as a keyboard shortcut, and the mask is still there but not visible. So now my change, the next change I'm going to make is going to be to the background only. And for those who spent hours making detailed masks, you'll appreciate what I just did, and you'll look at the detail of this mask, and it's just stunning the job that the Magic Brush tool does in terms of the accuracy of masking. So now what I can do, and I'll just again get rid of the visibility of the mask, and let's zoom out a bit so you can see the whole image, is I'll now go to, and I'm going to do something a little different here. I'm bringing out the high dynamic range tools. I'm going to decrease basically, actually not going to do high dynamic range. I'm going to do again exposure tools, and I'm going to pull back the brightness even more. And I'm pulling it back, and it's impacting the background only. So now all of a sudden we've got an image where if we compared it to the original, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second, you'll find that we've got the subject popping out a lot more, and at least to my eye, a scene that's more true to what I was actually photographing at the time. And so if I turn this layer off, you'll see where we were originally, and then when I turn it back on, you'll get a feel for what we've done. One other trick, and this is a good one for you people to put in your back pockets, is if you had a lot of distractions in the background, one really nice way to soften them up is not only darkening things a little bit in the background, but using the clarity tool and going to negative values. That will soften a background extremely nicely, and it's not something, I do it quite regularly. This image, of course, already has an extremely soft background, so there's no need to do it. And just for housekeeping, I'll zoom in and show you what I'm doing. I'm just going to name this layer, and I'm just going to call it basically brightness, and in this case it's the background that I dealt with only. It's really a good practice when you're working on layered images to go in and name them. You just have to click on it and type in, and you can rename very easily the layer you're on. So that's one change. And so again, we can look at what it looks like without that layer in effect or with it. Another thing we can do is Capture One has a great before and after tool that you can get to in the tool menus, or you can alternately just hit the Y key as a shortcut, and you've got a really quick way to do a before and after in terms of looking at what you've accomplished with your image. So that's step one in editing this image. And we showed you the Magic Brush tool in doing so. It's a powerful way of making masks, and it works on picking areas of similar RGB values, in other words, similar colors and tones. So I could have made one for the blues of the bird, so it's just a completely automated and very fast and efficient masking technique. Okay, let's now work on something else on this image, and I'm going to zoom in on it so you can see it closer up, and I'm going to go even, no, that's close enough. Now, picky little thing I do to my images. In this particular case, I think the viewer of the image would like to see a little more detail even on what this female bird is bringing to its nestling. So, how can I bring out both color and a little bit more detail there? Well, again, this is a selective change we're going to make on the image, and so we're going to create a new layer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new filled adjustment layer, And you can see it here now, adjustment layer 1. And I'm going to go in, and now this is a filled layer. It means it's got a mask covering the entire image. So if we make the mask visible, we can see that it's covering the entire area. And what I'm going to do in this, I'm going to go in and I'm going to lighten up this area and add a little color saturation. So first things first, I'll go in with the shadow tool and I'll bring this in so you can see it. I can hook it there, that's fine. And I'm just going to increase the shadows, and I'm going to, now because the mask is covering the entire image for now, it's doing it globally. So I'm just going to bring up the shadow detail enough so you can see shadow detail there on the caterpillar. It's shown everywhere, but I'm going to get rid of that in just a second, everywhere else. And I'm going to go in also with saturation, and I'm just going to bump up the saturation so you've got a little bit of color there. And the color, of course, is now more heavily saturated everywhere on the image. Now, I don't want it everywhere. I only want it on the caterpillar. So how do I accomplish that? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear my mask. So in other words, there's no mask whatsoever, and so there's no way the adjustment I made can show through. And now what I'm going to do, and I'm going to get the tools out of the way for now, is I'm going to brush in, using a brush, a mask just in this area. And so you can select a brush, and I can bring the layer palette back to show you by either clicking on this little brush tool, or you can just hit the keyboard shortcut, which quite logically is the letter B. And so I've now got a very large brush. I'll just reduce it in size, and I can just, and I'll grab my Wacom to do this. I'll just paint in some of the mask there. And I'm making the edit now only on the area where I'm painting in the mask. And again, if you want to see the mask, just hit the M key and you'll see that I'm painting in the mask right there. And we've got, I'll get rid of it now. Get rid of the visibility. And so now if I turn this layer on and off, it's a subtle change, but you'll see the change we've made on the image. And I'd even paint it in a bit more. And I can go back to the tools and make more of a, I could increase in this particular case because we were working with shadows. I can bring over the high dynamic range tool and say, no, I want a little bit more shadow showing through, and lighten it up even more if I want. So that's an example of what we can do. So again, we've got a second layer here, and again, being anal, I should make sure I label this. And so this is just shadow. I'll just do a shortcut, shadow and sat, and that's on the caterpillar. Okay, what would I do next on this image? Well, everybody likes to see, and I'll zoom in even further, everyone loves to see extreme, and I'll just move this down for you so you can see it better, extreme detail when it comes to eyes, right? Everyone wants to see extreme detail. It's zoomed in a bit too much for you. So what will we do here? Well, there's a couple ways we can approach this. I know with these birds that they've got brown eyes with a black pupil. And so one way to get those colors showing, of course, would be to bump up the exposure in the eye region only. But if I did that, I'd be also bumping up the exposure in the black area where the pupil is, as well as this area where the highlights are being shown. And so in this case, I'm not going to use exposure, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create another layer. Now, again, I always talk about keyboard shortcuts. I have a keyboard shortcut I've inputted into Capture One that allows me to create a filled adjustment layer. And so I'm going to do that here. So I'm going to go Command L, and now I've got a new adjustment layer, and if I hit the mask, you'll see it's everywhere. So again, it's a filled mask. And so what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to select, in this particular case, the HDR tool again, and I'll go a little bit tighter so you can see it better. And I'm going to choose the shadows to bump up because I know there's not going to affect the blacks very much right in the middle of the eye or the highlights, but this dark brown they're going to bump up. So let's bump that up and you can see the effect. And there we go. We've bumped it up. Now it's global at this point, so we do the same thing we had done on the other images where I can now clear the mask and I can select a brush now and go in and just brush that change into the region I want. And you start to see that all of a sudden we've got, and I can show you the mask now if you'd like. It's just, I'm using an ancient computer, so it sometimes takes a while to calculate the masks. But if I toggle this, if I turn this layer on and off, you'll see the effect I've made. And so you can, again, a little thing, but if you want your images to look their best, you can, focusing on the little things can make a tremendous difference. So, okay, let's zoom out again here, both on terms of the image as well as on the view we're looking at. Now, I'm going to only do two more things to this image. I'm just watching the time. Two more things, and just to show you a few more tools that are really quite interesting. The other thing when I'm looking at this bird is I'm looking and going, this is a highly side-lit image at dawn, and I could probably do with a bump of contrast in just this region. And I don't want it to be extreme, and I only want to work the midtones. So I'm going to pick in this particular case, I'm going to pick the clarity tool and bring it over and show you. And again, I'll bring my layers over because it's always important that you see what I'm doing with respect to layers. But what I'm going to do in this particular case is I'm going to increase the midtone contrast in this region. And it will, make the darks go a little darker and add to the effect of the side lighting, which will be a really pleasing, or should be a pleasing effect. So now this layer here, I'll just finish, I'll be anal again, and it was just shadows, and that was the eye we worked on. So again, we're going to create a new field adjustment layer in this particular case. So let's again just go in and add that layer. And now what I'm going to do is add, and again, you can see the mask. I'll just show you the mask. You can see it's covering the entire image. And I'll bump up the clarity. And again, it's bumping it up for the entire image. Now, clarity, again, is mid-tone contrast. It's not getting into the highlights. It's not getting into the deep shadows. But this is a way to get at those mid-tones. And again, I don't want it on the entire image. So what I'm going to do now is go back to my layer, and I'm going to clear the mask. And then again, following the same pattern we did before, I'll just increase the brush size. We'll go in and brush in what we brush in on the bird in the area we want. A little more contrast in just those specific regions. And if you want to see the mask at any time, you can just hit the M key to make the mask visible, and you'll see where the area I've painted the mask in. And I'm just using a fairly soft brush at this point, and this is not the kind of change where you need exceptionally accurate masking. So, whereas other changes we were making did demand higher accuracy. So there we go. So again, this is one, if we click it, the layer on and off, you should be able to see in the mantle of the bird here a change. So that's another example of selective editing using the mid-tone contrast tool called Clarity to improve the image. So if we zoom out now and look at the whole image and do a before and after, you can see we're getting to the point where we're making what was initially not a bad shot, but making it look a whole lot better with just a few quick edits. And I'm going to add a degree of, bump up the complexity here and do something that I think a lot of users will find really cool. So let me just label this one too, just so we've got it labeled. And that, of course, was Clarity, and it was mainly in the mantle of the bird. So we'll just leave that. Now, this image was shot right at sunrise, and the light was very, very warm. And so the areas that are most affected by the light should be, in a sense, warmer than they are. And so the question becomes, how can I get at just the bright parts of this bird and warm them up, but not warm up the entire image? And I'm sure everyone's thinking already, well, it's obviously a selective edit we're going to do, but how do we select just those brighter parts? Well, Capture One has got a very cool feature in the Layers tool, and I'll show you right now. So I'm just going to create another filled adjustment layer, and you can see the mask. It's fully there. Now, there's this box here that I've not, or not, this control that I haven't talked about at all so far. If I hit the Luma range, we open up a new dialog box, and what this is a way to take an existing mask and constrain it based on brightness values. And so in this case, my goal is to get to the bright part of the image. These sliders here go from dark to light. And so what I can do is, if I start moving the sliders on this side over, I start excluding the dark parts of the image from my mask. So by and large, what I'm doing is moving over and trying to get just the bright parts of the bird, and I've done so at this point, and these are the parts that are being most clearly illuminated by the light, and now I have a mask on those and nowhere else, virtually nowhere else on the image, unless the light was striking it directly where it should be warm. So that's the Luma range constraint. So my mask now is almost perfectly following the bright areas I want it to follow. I'm going to soften this a little bit using the controls below, and if we had 4 hours, we could go into all the different controls, but I'm just going to, for now, just do it quickly and hit the apply button, and I've now got this mask in place. Now, what am I going to do to warm it up? Now I'm going to turn the visibility of the mask off, so you won't see the mask anymore. But I'm then going to go in and pull over one of my favorite tools, the color balance tool. And what this tool allows you to do, and I'll go, because I've already got it constrained with a mask, I can just work in the master tab. I can go in and let me zoom in a little bit. That's good enough. I'll just go a little bit larger. And so to operate this tool, there's a number of different ways to operate it. The easiest and most intuitive is to literally grab the center and move it towards the type of color you want to enhance. So in this case, I'm moving it towards the warmer tones, which are being applied only to the areas where the mask is. So I've done it now. I've warmed up only those areas on the bird that were in the bright light. So we've added warming and made the lighting look very realistic. So again, if I go back and do a before and after, and you can see that we've added a nice warmth to just part of the image, which is a really cool tool. So the Luma Range tool is just amazing for landscape shooting. Whenever you have to select or modify a mask based on brightness, it's very intuitive to use. You could pick mid-tones only. It's absolutely one of my favorite tools in Capture One, and you can result in complex masks very quickly with using or get very detailed complex masks extremely quickly. It's just super. Now, how are we doing on time? We've got about 10 minutes. The only other thing I want to show you is there's a new feature that came out in version, I believe again it was 21.1 of Capture One, called style brushes. And what they are a way to group changes that you regularly use together. So you may make 2 or 3 adjustments to an image. You can save those and put those together on a style brush. So that's the first thing it does. And the second thing it does is when you use a style brush, it automatically creates a new layer for that style. So what I'm going to do here, again, just so we keep things neat and tidy, is just quickly go color balance is all I did on this layer. And that was to the bright bits. There we go. Now, I want to sharpen up. If you look at this image, it's going to be hard to see over zoom, but parts of the wings here are falling just outside the depth of field, outside the zone of sharpest focus, a little bit up here too. I would have focused about here. I don't always focus on the eye, so I would have focused somewhere about here, hoping to split the depth of field and get all the bird, but I missed it slightly. With style brushes, and I'll zoom in so everyone can see it even a little better. They come with several pre-built style brushes that come from Capture One Pro. I could go in and look and show you, there's tons of them in here. You can also create your own. And being a control freak, of course, I build my own, as well as using the ones supplied by Capture One. And I've built some called Sharpen for fine details and Sharpen for soft regions. The Sharpen for soft regions is a heavy sharpening, but it also involves the clarity tool in that there's a slider in clarity called structure, which is in a sense, a more micro structure that acts extremely effectively at pulling out hair detail or feather detail. And so with my style brush called Soft Region, what I can do is just click on it. It gives me a brush, and if you watch the layers here, the minute I make contact with the image, with my brush, it creates a new layer that takes on the name of my brush. And if you look at what I've got going, is I've got a structure of 40, because that's what I've built into the brush. And if I brought sharpening over, we're getting crowded here, so I'll get rid of the style brush. You'll see that I've got some fairly high amounts in the sharpening as well. And I'm going to go in now and enhance just a few areas here with this style brush and pull more sharpness out of these regions, and you can see all of a sudden there's much more detail in the feathers. And yeah, I'll show you the mask in just a moment. There we go. And if I show you the mask, you'll see that it's in these lower regions of the bird only, where I was a little out of focus. And you can see we've added, and I can toggle this one on and off to the layer if you'd like, so you can see again the detail you add. If you watch parts of it here, you'll see it really much better when you've got there's before, there's after. So that's just one image, and we're actually getting low on time, so I don't think we can do too many more tonight, or any more. But we've gone from this image, the raw capture, to this image, and in just, and of course this would be, if you weren't narrating and trying to explain everything, this would be about 5 minutes of editing you'd do, and you've gone from, kind of more of a bit of a vanilla image to one that's showing a lot of improvement, basically. So Okay. That's all I was going to cover on the image editing for tonight. Again, it's Capture One. We can do, we can go on and we could go for hours and hours showing you the different capabilities. I just wanted to give you a feel for not only some of the new tools like the Magic Brush, but also some of the things you can do with them and why you would do them. Before I conclude this part, I've got to, of course, as always, make my final plea that this is part of, to me it's a big thing, wildlife photography ethics, is that my plea to you is any of the wildlife image captures that you want to edit with a great program like Capture One, make sure they were captured ethically, and always make sure the welfare of your subjects comes before your images. They're always more valuable than your images. And I constrain myself in how I work in the field fairly extremely. And if you want to see the image, how I limit myself in terms of the ethics I believe I impose on myself, feel free to go to this place on the website, and I think you'll find it interesting. And so it's a big issue. I think it's an important issue. So, Dave, are you there?
Yeah, fantastic, man. I learned a lot. So it's a great, like a quick overview. We could have gone for hours and hours going into the details of it. So I like the fact, yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, I like the fact how you're sort of using layers a lot more in there. I mean, we don't have that ability with Lightroom to go into the multiple layers to toggle on and off without going into Photoshop. So I do like that, and I like the fact that you can drag the toolbars exactly where you want them, right over top of the spot that you close to it. That's pretty cool. Now I do have a question about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Dave.
I do have a question about the sharpening. I mean, that was a big thing. When it comes to birds, I mean, aside from spending gazillion dollars on large lenses that are in the background of your shot there, we always want the sharpest shot. When is sharpening too far? What are your kind of limits to how far you can sharpen something?
Well, it's a great question. One thing I would have loved to have spent more time explaining was the whole way sharpening is done in Capture One. It supports basically what most high-end editors do with their image editing is 3-step sharpening. So the image, when they come into Capture One, they're automatically go through a capture sharpening routine. So the way we can see that is if we go to the background layer and we look at the background, and then we bring the sharpening tool up, and I just have to go back to the desktop for a second. So we bring up the sharpening. This is the sharpening that was built into, and I can zoom in slightly if people can't see it, that's built into the background layer automatically by Capture One, and that is unique to your camera, so it's model specific. The output sharpening on your image, so for print or for screen, is done in the export dialog box. So you've got capture sharpening done automatically. Now these values, by the way, can be changed, and you could change them to your heart's content and save them. You just go in and save as new defaults for your camera. So I could change them and save them as new defaults for a Nikon Z7 II. And the output sharpening, like I say, is done with your process or your export recipe. However, there's also what most people call creative sharpening, which is what I was showing on the image. And it's interesting because how you when you're doing creative sharpening on an image, you want to be very careful not to overcook it the way you were suggesting. And you can, with Capture One, you can go into halo suppression, because there's one problem if you over sharpen an image is you start getting halos around that section. I'm going to give you an answer that isn't fully satisfactory. It is that when you're doing creative sharpening on your original capture, you have to, in a sense, know from experience if you do resolution reduction on the image, or if you're going to go to a different size and not change the resolution in terms of the total resolution, how it's going to act, and that only comes with some experience. The last thing I'd say about it is that while I was showing you all this on my iMac tonight, because it's more convenient to have the menus there than on my ISO, you really want to use it on a very well calibrated and a display that isn't of too high a resolution. So don't want to do this on a retina. You want to do it on about 100 pixel per inch monitor, like something like a good quality ISO or an NEC. Those are the kind of monitors you'll want to do it on. So sharpening is I've got a book that thick on sharpening, you know, like it's a tough one, but you definitely want to avoid overcooking them for sure. And what shows up is, you know, we call it sometimes the image looks crunchy, or it looks, you know, a little, you've gone too far in the sharpening. So, and one last point I'd make there is that you'll find, and I'm one of the worst offenders, you'll find that people will get obsessive on getting sharp lenses, and half the time the kind of differences they're worrying about you can deal with if you know how to sharpen images in post-processing. So the differences disappear anyways. So long-winded answer. I'm like Chris at Nikon, you know. So there's the long answer to a very simple question.
Well, you're obviously a Nikon shooter. Do you find that Capture One works better, or with certain camera brands, their raw files behave a little nicer with Capture One than others?
There's certain characteristics you'll see. I wouldn't call it nicer or worse. You might find that, you know, a Canon user using a specific Canon camera may say, well, by default the profile's a little too warm, so they may want to change the profile a little bit for the specific camera under the white balance, or, you know, but no, I don't think you're going to find much. You know, Capture One takes a lot of pride in offering great quality camera profiles for a wide range of cameras. One thing that has always stuck out for me is that if you use Nikon specific software to process your images, they've always been known for having great color. So if you use Capture NX or NXD, those things have always been known for having great color. That same color, I find that when I'm using Capture One, the color is as vibrant as it is with Capture NX or Capture NXD, those sorts, or now Studio, Capture Studio or NX Studio. So yeah, I don't think you're going to find much of a difference in terms of quality between brands at all. So.
Okay. Now the other big one that I hear about all the time is, especially with these cameras nowadays shooting much higher ISOs, is how well does Capture One deal with noise reduction, especially on those high ISOs?
Yeah, you're probably aware that in the last couple of years there's been a few programs come out, Topaz Denoise, ON1, that are full anti-noise programs, and they're leading the way right now, a few of them. And so for extreme ISOs, and I am talking like when I'm using a D6, if I shoot an image at ISO 25,600, there's no two ways about it. I can do better with Topaz than I can with Capture One. However, in the real world, when you're shooting, you know, at ISO 6400 and above, I never find a reason to leave Capture One for its noise reduction. I really like it. It does a great job on it. It's again a little. We could spend a full hour session on noise reduction in Capture One. That would be interesting, but we just can't get into it now. But it does a great job. Again, the noise reduction is built into the camera profile. So the noise reduction it does for a Nikon Z7 II is going to be different than what it does for a Nikon D6 in terms of how it applies it for a specific image. So I did appreciate like how you know, you're looking at just you know, taking the image and sort of separating into different zones you want to improve with. And it was pretty impressive to see how quickly you could mask things off. So that was pretty good. So as we're trying to wrap up a little bit here, but I want to hear the top 3 reasons to pick Capture One over any other program.
Now
For me, number one
keep it to like 15 minutes. That's all we got time for.
I'll try to keep this one really brief. Number one is the selective editing tools, in my mind, which you just saw, the way you could create the masks so quickly, the Luma mask, etc. So that would be my absolute number one favorite thing about Capture One, is the way they've implemented selective editing. Number two would be the way they handle color in terms of their two top color tools, which are the color editor and secondly, the color balance tool. I use those tools all the time. And in a sense, if you want a one-line summary of each tool, the color editor tool is more of a color correction tool, whereas the color balance tool is more for creative effects, like I did on the Bluebird, where we added warmth using the color balance tool to just the brightest areas to mimic the warm sunlight. And the last but not least would be the way you can call images, the ability, all the tools that are in a sense the light table tools of Capture One. Like any photographer, when I'm on a shoot, I'm shooting scads and scads of images. And during and of course, like all photographers, especially nature photographers, I'm way behind in my image calling. One of my projects during the pandemic was cleaning up my catalogs, and I got rid of almost 500,000 images. And in the time I saved because of the exceptional light table tools, and I could go through them all, but again, there's another full session. We could go through that, but the time I saved in terms of my image culling, because I could look at 12 at once at 100% magnification and quickly select the one I wanted to keep out of that dozen images. So those would be the three. So selective editing tools, the way it handles color, and its light table tools, including specific culling tools. There you go.
Oh,
way less than 15 minutes.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, the calling part of it actually brings up a good point, because I agree. We tend to shoot a lot of product nowadays, so being able to cull it. Now, have you ever used like Photo Mechanic compared to that? Seems a very popular program as well. Do you find it's faster, or do you find Capture One just as fast as doing that?
Well, pre-import, in a sense, when you look, what I was showing during the import phase, where you've got the large previews, and those will be as big as the monitor you're on, so you can expand that window and you'll expand those previews. They're as fast. I can't think of anything faster, because they're instantly there, because they're the built-in JPEG previews, just the way Photo Mechanic works. In a sense, it almost seems like that was a response to Photo Mechanic. Again, I'm not implying that that's exactly what happened in terms of coming up with that feature, but it's a great feature for the fast culling. And so that, in my mind, that's putting it in the Photo Mechanic category. And in terms of once they're in the computer, of course, that's usually you can with Photo Mechanic Plus work with catalogs and that, but once in, I don't know of anything better than Capture One for your culling. Now, the big strength of Photo Mechanic, of course, is it's a metadata junkie loves Photo Mechanic, and it's really built for a workflow that's solely for speed. So photojournalists, right? They love Photo Mechanic. Most nature photographers aren't in a speed-based workflow, they're in a quality-based workflow. And so the few seconds you might save in some aspects of metadata, or doing extra things with metadata, is likely not important to a nature photographer. So I've taught or tutored many people that came to me and saying, I always use Photo Mechanic first, and by the time we're finished tutoring sessions, they're saying, well, I've thrown away Photo Mechanic and I'm using now just Capture One. So there you go.
No, that's fantastic. Well, Brett, thank you so much for joining us tonight. That was a very informative. We should do this again. I would like to even dig deeper into some of those modules there. Going into sharpening or noise reduction. I know we can dig in much deeper with those, and those are like crucial
yeah.
crucial features for so many photographers. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. I want to thank Capture One for sponsoring us tonight. And a reminder that if you register for the event, we will send you a special Capture One offers. If you didn't register and you want those Canadian offers, email Evelyn at thecamerastore.com and you can be added to that list. And keep in mind, we always have more events coming up soon. So head over to thecamerastore.com under the events to see topics and the schedules. And of course, if you like what you saw, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell and you get pinged the next time we go live. So thanks again for watching. We'll catch you again soon.